All right, well, welcome to the Nonprofit Circle. This is our bi-monthly event. It's the second Thursday of the month. We do the second and fourth Thursdays, and we even had two special topics this week or this month. This past Tuesday, we did a nonprofit brand wellness checkup, and that recording is up in the school community. It's a course that you can take. There's an outline and there's a recording. It's only 45 minutes long. It gives you an overview. Is your brand stagnating yourself, or is it helping you grow? And that was brought to you by Ty and Adrian from Austin, Texas at AdLab. And they've done some work with me with a few nonprofits and for-profits. And they're real ad agency guys, and they're accessible to startup nonprofits like ourselves. So appreciated them coming on. And they're happy to do one-on-one calls with anyone. And they have a good package for nonprofits. They can do a full nonprofit brand wellness checkup for $999, which includes a full report and a full like, here's your way out of it and here's a plan for you. So that was something I worked with them. Normally, you can't touch professional brand ad agency guys without 10,000 or more dollars. So I said, what could you do for $999? And that's what they're doing. And we have no financial relationship, just trying to get the right people to the right nonprofits. And the second thing is, what is a nonprofit executive director's focus? What should it be? And just had a very illuminating call with Ironbound Boxing, Mike Stedman. He's a Naval Academy grad, and we're bringing in a new executive director to replace him. And the new executive director is focused on programming. And Mike stopped the conversation and he said, stop being a programming director. And even myself, as being an advisor and a coach for the new incoming executive director, I realized that we were building the programming to give the new executive director confidence that he knew what he was talking about. But when we took another look at it, it's like, wait a minute, you have your story. You are a product of Ironbound Boxing. You came into Ironbound Boxing homeless, and now you're a college graduate, and now you're the new executive director. You have the story. And so Mike charged us, and I passed the same story to you all, is as executive directors, just keep telling your story about what you intend to do with that donation. And while you do have programming, or you may be building programming in parallel, just continue to get more at bats telling your story and going for the nonprofit large donation. Become the rainmaker, because you can get bogged down for weeks, months, even years building programming that you think you need to build before you ask for the donation. But ask for the donation now and build the programming in parallel. Sell the vision and get the money. So that's the charge for today. And to be attuned to your time, we're going to go through today's topic by Rikki is onboarding board members. How to onboard your board members and say, welcome to being on the board of a nonprofit. Also, the sit rep for board members, we're going to continue to build that communication tool. I'll go over the school community so you know what's available. We'll have time for hot seat, open discussion, and any action items. Remember, your 990s due on the 15th of May. Again, why am I doing this? I'm a retiree and been nonprofit advising for the last 6 or 8 years. I can't believe I've been retired for 9 years. And it's my passion. It gets me out of bed. I love solving complex problems, and that's why I'm doing this. Man, Rikki, what a godsend. I stopped telling people how awesome she is because she was giving out hours to everybody. And then she would tell me she only has 20 hours for me each month. And I'm like, oh, wow, I better stop. I'm not a scarcity mindseted. Rikki's always available to help you, and the universe will always provide. But Rikki is first and foremost a great American, a patriot, a military spouse, and she's moved all over and she's learned to survive, if not thrive, by being an entrepreneur, being a project manager, being a financial planner, taking courses in nonprofit compliance, getting college certificates in it, um, really digging into things and being a number one researcher on any topic. She's also a really good spreadsheet pivot table person, like more nerd. I wish I could say I could do pivot tables the way she can. She's a double E uh, degree person. Like how many women were in her electrical engineering courses? Probably the only woman. So really have a great respect for her journey, not only as a military spouse with her Navy husband at a joint space force, Vandenberg in California, and deep respect for them. And then, as they transition, she's really building a great practice to be a project manager, a compliance officer, a nonprofit advisor. And I don't hold back. I want her to be the next Vince Lindenmeyer and to be doing everything that I'm doing. And so we're mentoring her to build her practice as well. And she's really does what she's does as a passion, and I don't think she has a problem getting out of bed, especially working with me on the East Coast. She has to get out of bed a lot earlier than I would, you know, make her, but sometimes it's 7 in the morning and she's on a call with me. So I appreciate her to no end. And with that, Rikki, I'll pass it over to you to talk about onboarding the board member. What do they need to know?
All right, so we're going to try and go over some really basic things that might not sound so basic all the time. So we're going to look at governance, policy, and compliance with regards to your nonprofit organization. Okay, so what we hope to accomplish today is we hope to be able to explore the distinction between a nonprofit and a tax-exempt organization. We're going to look at IRS requirements for the 501c3 status. And we're going to look at the roles and responsibilities of board members and officers, right? Those are two different entities or two different groups. We're also going to review some essential policies and governance practices so we can work on transparency with the general public for our organization. And then we're also going to look at the actual definitions by the IRS for some of the terms that we're going to talk about today. Before we move on to the next slide, though, I'm not going to do all the chatting. I'm hoping we'll have some interaction here. So I'm looking to see, does anybody know the difference between a nonprofit and a tax-exempt status? And can anyone tell me how or why?
When people talk about tax exempt, oh, go ahead. I was going to bail you out. Oh, Scott was going to bail me out. He's the crazy.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I'll start the discussion. I think there's certain levels of tax, not or tax-free status, but some are family foundations and there's different categories of them. But one is whether or not you receive your funding from the public. I believe there's a criteria there. Others are set up to where if you're funded yourself, how much you have to distribute annually. I don't know if that's the direction you're going with the question.
And I would think that tax exempt, when I have clients that say we want to be tax exempt, that's when we want to go to Costco and not pay sales tax.
Okay.
So like usually for Nebraska, that comes down to, well, are you a church? Because Nebraska will let a church go to Costco and not pay sales tax. But they're all nonprofits. So when you talk about family foundation or public charity, they're all nonprofit organizations and they all have similar characteristics. Yes, some donations have 100% write-off and others have less than 100% if you're like a private foundation. But I believe the tax exempt category is when we start to fall into schools and churches, and they want sales tax exempt, and they want that letter they can take to Costco. Did I hit it, Rikki?
Yep, everybody's close, which is great. So if we can move to the next slide, please. All right, so a nonprofit organization, the profits of a nonprofit must benefit the organization's mission, right? So the point of that money is it goes directly back into the nonprofit in order to help with programming or services. That money does not get fluctuated elsewhere, correct? Does that help a little bit? I see some shaking heads, yes. Okay, all right. A tax-exempt organization is so defined by the IRS as when they meet the requirements of a particular statutory provision that provides for the exempt status. So to obtain tax exemption, there's a request for recognition that needs to be submitted. So everybody probably submitted something like a Form 1023 with the IRS to try to obtain tax exempt. Yes? Make sense? Okay. So in other words, a good way to also think of it too is the nonprofit status comes from the state, whereas the IRS tax exempt status comes from the federal government. Good?
Good point. Good point.
Okay. So before we move to the next slide, what requirements do you think the IRS has for organizations to qualify as a 501c3 tax exempt organization?
They need board members.
Good. What else?
They need a mission that sounds like a public charity.
Yeah, they have to have a purpose. Yep.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so next slide, please. Okay, so you have to be organized and operated exclusively for an exempt purpose. Perfect, right? Everybody understands that. Okay, and that exempt purpose is set forth in section 501c3 as charitable, religious, educational, and scientific. Those are the major ones. There are some other nonprofit statuses that are covered as well, but those go into other 501cs. Okay, none of the earnings may inure to any private shareholder or individual, right? So we're not paying anybody particularly through the nonprofit organization with regards to the earnings that the organization makes. Not attempt to influence legislation as a substantial part of its activities, right? So no campaigning, right? In other words, most nonprofits don't campaign. They don't specifically set out to help anybody in the political party. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can advocate on the Hill, and you can meet with politicians on behalf of your mission, but notice the keyword substantial, and that it's not your main mission to be
Right.
political, but you can still there's still a lot of advocacy things that you can do, and there's a lot of training out there for a nonprofit to know the exact lanes that they can walk to deal with politicians.
Right. Another good, just a key point to note, I think most people recognize 501c3 as a tax exempt status. There are actually 29 501c organizations that are recognized. So just a good point so other people realize. 501c3 would be any business leagues, or you would know them as chambers of commerce. 501c19s would be veteran organization focused. So you might have heard some of those, but just didn't realize that those also exist and they are tax exempt. Okay, so before we move to the next slide, steps for an organization to take in order to acquire a 501c3 status. Do we know what those are?
You have to file.
Okay.
You need a FEIN, you need to register with your state, and then you need to do 1023. It's 3 major steps. There may be others.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, so it might look a little bit awkward, just a really quick flow chart here. So the nonprofit registers with the state first, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we register with the state. I apologize, this is just Colorado because this was a case study I was working on, so I just put Colorado in here as an example. And Colorado actually requires nonprofits to register as corporations. So states do have regulations as to how nonprofits can file, what type of entity structure they are. Once you do that, then you file an SS4 form with the IRS in order to obtain your EIN. If the organization believes it has a tax-exempt status that already exists, then they can try to apply for recognition by completing a Form 1023 or 1023-EZ. It's the shorter form of the 1023. In order to determine which form you fill out, you should work on the eligibility worksheet. See if you can fill out or complete the 1023-EZ. If you meet the requirements, you go to pay.gov, you complete the 1023-EZ, and then you pay the fee. Once that happens, then of course you wait for the IRS to determine whether or not they approve you for your tax-exempt status request. If you don't meet the 1023-EZ eligibility, then you file the full Form 1023. You still pay the fee and you still wait for the IRS determination letter. Make sense? All right, so those are the basics. All right, now once an organization has tax-exempt status, what ongoing responsibilities do you or the organization have in order to maintain that status?
You need to stay in line with the state. Yeah, go ahead.
Complying with the state. I mean, I'm assuming like with Florida, it would be what is that? Sunbiz is what I just paid.
Annual registration for Sunbiz. There you go.
Right.
And then what else? You got to do with the feds. You got to file what?
The 990N.
That's the postcard. You'll do the 990N November, 990EZ, or the 990 long form, depending on what you've raised and what you need to report.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, Scott?
Nope. Yeah, just the various state registrations. Not just the one you're in. It depends on where you're raising money.
Yeah, the solicitations for the 23 states that you may have raised money in, correct?
Yeah. Yep. Perfect. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so there are various things that impact your tax-exempt status. So you want to make sure that you continue to operate with an exempt purpose. You file your Form 990 every year. Profits don't benefit an individual, but they benefit or go back into the mission or programming for the organization. There's limited lobbying activity. You limit any unrelated business income and no political campaign activity. Make sense? Perfect. Okay. So can anyone now explain the difference between a board member and an officer with regards to a nonprofit? Oh, stumped you all. No, I know you all
Yeah.
know.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'll just say for us in Georgia, you have the state requires you to have a minimum of 3 officers. As far as the number of your board members, it's up to you, but you have to have a minimum of 3 registered with the state.
Okay.
In Nevada, it's similar, and we have to have, so the officers are the president of the board, the secretary, and the treasurer, for example. And if you had a vice president, then there'd be a vice president too. Those are designated officers, and we have to file them where you list them. You have to list their names on our. I think I can't remember if it's federal or if it's just state, but we do have to register them every year. So
Perfect. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so a board member's role is critical to the function of the organization. They actually oversee the organization's mission, requiring all team members to make sure that they uphold to that mission and the goals. So they make sure that the organization complies with state, local, and federal laws, right? So they really kind of are the overarching tool that makes sure that the organization is on the correct path, stays on the path as defined by tax exempt, if that's the mission and the goal, right? Okay, so officers are the ones that handle the day-to-day operations. So they'll have titles like Chief Executive Officer, Chief Financial Officer, President, Treasurer, etc. Okay? Okay. What laws or regulations do we think that nonprofits need to comply with at different levels of the government?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So there are different laws that impact a nonprofit, and there are different entities that may provide regulation to those laws. So I'm looking to see who has an impact on how a nonprofit operates.
Local, any city regulation or licensing, state, the Secretary of State's office, and federal, the IRS.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so there's a lot here, and I apologize, but I'm trying to cover some of the basics. So federal, right, obviously, to be organized and operated exclusively for a tax-exempt purpose. All the things that we had stated previously, no attempt to influence legislation, you submit Form 990 annually to them, and none of the earnings benefit any of the shareholders or the individual. Then you have the state piece. So that's the charitable solicitation, that's the tax office, and then potentially the Secretary of State, depending on how the state's set up. So they're your bylaws, your articles, things like that. A lot of people don't think about the employment piece or the employment side, especially if you have employees. So you need to make sure you're paying people the appropriate wages. You have anti-discrimination policies, and you follow, the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, yes? There's another overarching piece that most people don't think about or realize, and that's the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. That actually had an impact on how the federal government restructured the 990 form in order to kind of enhance that compliancy piece for nonprofits. So this law was established because of financial fraud that happened and prompted the IRS to set up a nonprofit governance to change that Form 990. So this resulted in things like the whistleblower policy and the document retention and destruction policy. Does it help clarify a little bit for everybody?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. What special duties do you think board members have when they serve the nonprofit organization?
Oversight.
Yes. Good.
committee chairs.
Good. There's one more.
Funding, fundraising.
Yes.
That meant sort of, right?
Yes, sort of.
Said one more, and I said, you're like, yeah, what?
Yeah, close. It was close. Okay, next.
Sustainability.
True. Yes, that does fall into one of the categories. True. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So a board member has a fiduciary duty. Does everybody understand the term fiduciary duty? Okay, Scott, I see you shaking your head. Yeah, so give me an idea as to what you think fiduciary duty means.
It is to, I think it's pretty broad in the sense that you're responsible to make sure that the organization is fulfilling all of their obligations from a management, oversight, tax, responsibility of your tracking your donations and the reporting of it and the accounting. It's all of the legal aspects that's what you're holding the board members accountable for.
Yes, good. There's just a little bit more. Anybody else want to add to that? There's just a little bit of extra piece. Okay, so the board members, their role is they make the nonprofit the priority, right? So you also want to think about conflict of interest, right? So the board member shouldn't have a conflict of interest with or you hope, a very small piece of conflict with the organization with regards to its mission and goals. Yes, so in other words, the board is there to make sure that the organization's mission and goals is always primary. It's always forefront. It's always on top. So their goal is always whatever helps benefit the nonprofit organization and abides by the mission and the tax exempt status. That's what we do. Okay, so there are 3 duties, and you guys are very, very close, so that's great. First duty is duty of obedience. So the directors have a duty to comply with all the laws that impact that nonprofit organization. They also have a duty to make sure that all laws are being met. So whatever policies we may need to be set up, making sure those 990s are filed, making sure your tax with the state is filed, your annual reports with the state are filed. So duty of obedience, right? Duty of loyalty is an act in good faith for the benefit of the organization. So again, everything is primary for the organization, their goal, and their mission. So duty of loyalty. The last core duty is duty of care. So you always act in the best interest of the organization. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So these duties are the primary foundation of ethical and effective governance. We all agree on that? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so before we move on, what are the key documents you think every nonprofit organization should have in place?
Articles of incorporation in our bylaws.
Perfect.
Conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest.
Yes, perfect. What else? We mentioned 2 in the previous slide. What were the 2 we mentioned in the previous slide?
Whistleblower.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And document retention was the other one.
Yes, perfect.
Employment equal employment, any kind of non-discrimination.
Yeah, perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Okay, next slide, please. So how about your mission statement for your organization, right? That's kind of important. That was used to fill out the Form 1023 application when you applied.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also use and put that mission statement, or you're supposed to, on your Form 990 every year when you file. Okay, articles of incorporation. That's important for each state. Now, each state does not call them articles of incorporation. They could be articles of corporation or something like that. So the state might not necessarily refer to them as articles of incorporation, but something similar there too. For Colorado, just as a case study, because this is what I did, Colorado requires name, location, registered agent and their contact information, as well as a distribution upon dissolution in the Articles of Incorporation. Most states do require that, but again, it does vary slightly. You just want to be familiar with what your state requires. Okay, bylaws, right? These are the rules for the board to follow with regard to their roles on how they represent the organization and what they do. Okay, the IRS actually has a series of 7 policies that they recommend for nonprofits. They include conflict of interest, executive compensation, investment, fundraising, document retention and destruction, ethics and whistleblower, and then of course your meeting minutes and your records. That should also be a policy as well. Any questions or concerns?
We have templates of those 7 policies that Rikki just mentioned. We have templates in the Asana board, which is free to all the nonprofit leader circle. So just reach out to us. We'll get those templates to you. They're just recommended. Do your own research and just work from the template.
Okay, next slide for me, please. We're actually just really quickly going to cover a couple of these just so everybody has a general idea of what they are. So the whistleblower policy defines how team members report illegal activities. Illegal activities would be anything that goes against the organization's mission. There will be no negative consequences for anybody who does any reporting, and all reports will remain confidential. Conflict of interest policy. It defines exactly what a conflict is, how that conflict will be handled, allow for a board member to disclose in writing any conflicts that they may have, and that board member can't be part of a discussion or a vote where they may have a potential conflict. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we'll cover just another 2. Next slide for me, please. Okay. So document and retention's a big one, right? This one handles what you do exactly with documents with regards to the nonprofit. So guidelines for handling how we do electronic files, how we do our backup procedures or our archiving of our documents, how regularly do we check up on the reliability of the system that we're using for our document retention, and the length at which we keep certain files, right? So there may be some files you permanently keep, and there may be other files that you can destroy after a certain period of time. So anybody want to give me an example of a document that you should keep for the life of the organization?
The determination letter,
Yes.
the FEIN letter,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
all formation documents,
Yes.
bylaws.
Okay. Perfect. Anything that you would keep for just a limited amount of time, enough for use for say a month potentially.
Well, you got to keep your 990 for a period of 7 years. That's more than 3 months, but
Right. Yep. So that would be kind of like intermediate or middle ground, right? So they may not be permanent, but maybe something intermediate. And then I want something that's more short term.
Emails.
Yes. Perfect. Okay, when would you think you would need to keep an email? There might be an exception though to an email. When would you might need to keep an email?
If it has some kind of financial information in it.
Yes. Perfect. What else?
If it pertained to any of the documents that you wrote, so like
Yes.
conflict of interest, all of those things.
Correct. Perfect. Anything else?
Would it be employment related too?
Yep, employment related. And if for some reason you have some exchange happening via email from a legal perspective, right? You also want to make sure you keep those because that's important. Those need to be kept. And sometimes an email can be considered an actual written record of something, right? So you would want to keep anything from that perspective as well. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then the last policy that I think is really essential is an executive compensation policy, right? A charity may not pay more than is reasonable compensation for services rendered. That's the IRS definition of executive compensation. Does that also make sense to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any questions on those four? We didn't cover all seven. Those are just the four, but does anybody have questions on any of those?
That's broad language, but is it generally considered like to not get in a newspaper? You don't really want to pay like your executive director 6 figures, or it is reasonable compensation, but
So, yep, no, that's a great question. And actually, what you do is the IRS recommends what are other executive directors in your same field getting paid, right? So kind of doing like either a Glassdoor type of research or something like that. You want to be within the scope of reasonable. What are others being paid that are in the same position?
Okay.
Does that make sense? That help a little bit more? Okay. Okay. The next slide is talking about risk. Does anybody have any risks that they may have faced with their nonprofit? Or has everybody been relatively okay? Any risk?
Risk?
there's error and omission insurance or board of director insurance. Can you talk about that? Like some nonprofits feel they need errors and omissions insurance for the board to protect them.
It's dependent on the board member's background, right? If the board member specifically is handling or has experience in financing and they're taking care of financing for you, they may want to have, or organization may want to look at errors and omission. If they are doing your taxes and they have that experience from a tax perspective, you may also want to look at it from that. I can tell you, I have with my certified as my, accredited financial counselor background, I have been looking at errors and omission just to make sure that when I'm working with my own clients that there isn't anything that I need to be worried about there for them, right? So I do that from my own, I've been doing that for my own research and my own benefit, just so I don't hold my clients are put into a nasty situation. But that is a potential possibility. It would be a good idea to look at. But you can also talk with your board member. They may be carrying their own personal policy as well. You just want to verify with that policy that it would cover them under their board responsibilities.
Scott,
Yeah.
as a foundation for hospital art with an international mission, how do you mitigate risk?
So, well, one of the things you kind of made reference to, we have a D&O policy, directors and officers policy, that, and that can be of value because if you want to get people to serve on your board, it provides them protection so that they're not going to be sued or anything like that on behalf of the organization, because that could be someone's reluctance to join your board if they're like, hey, I want to do this, but I don't want to be sued. So,
Right.
so we have that. That's probably one of the big things we do.
Is that based on the total revenue you bring in, or like is it generally like a $1,500 policy? Like what's the ballpark on D&O?
I'm not sure how they calculate. Ours is like $1,000 a year. So I don't know. I don't know if it's based on the size of your board or the income. I'm not really sure. They don't ever ask. They just renew it every year. So not sure.
I know for errors and omission, at least from the research that I've been doing, it's based on your salary income. So.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to look at roughly 3 potential areas of risk. So from a legal perspective, you could be non-compliant with regards to taxes, to employment laws, and to fundraising and to soliciting, right? It's really important that we look to make sure that all the organizations are covered with regards to that. So you want to check your state. In order to mitigate that, what can we do? So we can conduct an internal audit annually. We also can set reminders on our organization master calendar for any important dates. So the annual filing with the state, the annual solicitation, the annual state sales tax, filing our Form 990, right? Those are all dates that we can put on our master calendar to help us remember that we need to get that information submitted in a timely manner. Okay, another category would be financial, and potentials for risk there would be fraud, stealing, or misuse and mismanagement of funds. So a potential mitigation plan for that, segregate the duties. So you don't allow one person to always be in charge of every aspect when it comes to the financial controls of the organization, right? So maybe somebody does your budget for you, somebody else is doing your annual statement review, somebody else is doing purchases only specifically. So that's another way to mitigate some of the financial challenges potentially. Then there's also operational risk, right? So we have service disruption. There's now cybersecurity and data breaches we need to be worried about. And there's also misconduct or mismanagement in general and in the administration segment of the organization. So things that we can do to mitigate, we can adequately train everybody so that they're provided with the appropriate responsibilities based off their role. We can also make sure we have encryption, we have firewalls, and we're doing regular backups as much as possible, right? Okay, any questions?
Nope. I do. I don't have a comment. I have a comment. I don't have a question. So like liability insurance has been extremely difficult. I've been told by several organizations that based on review of what we do, that they will not insure us. I know it's also a challenge for like shooting ranges and stuff like that. So just be aware that there may be some challenges associated with some types of liability insurance. And then the other thing I would say is errors and omissions. I think this is just my personal opinion. The insurance industry tries to sell everybody errors and omissions. Many times errors and omissions has to do when you're like real estate agents have errors and omissions because they're handling trust funds.
Mm-hmm.
So they're handling funds that don't belong to them. I would say I would recommend everybody evaluate their risk if they're using a bookkeeper and or an accountant on whether they need errors and omissions insurance. That's going to be an individual personalized decision. So just a thought.
No, that's perfect.
I have a comment too, if I can, that on the financial and the mitigation dependent on the size of your organization. If you've got a small organization with, the majority of the financial expenditures coming from your executive director or whoever it is that's doing that, the one good mitigation strategy is to impose a policy that limits the expenditure amount for anybody in the organization if they're a check writer on the checking account writing policy. So whether it's just depends on what your costs are or whatever, but $1,000 or $1,500 that requires a board approval before making an expenditure over a set amount, and that has been a healthy way to make sure there's no questions come the board meeting and everybody can see what we spent money on and stuff. So
Scott, can you say what your limit is right now?
I think it's $1,500. I'm pretty sure that's where we are right now. We started at 1,000 and that became a little unrealistic. Then we have $1,500. But every meeting we lay out every, you know, expense that has gone toward. So
And Scott Fight, do you have a number that they limit you to
As far as how much I can write a check or pay?
without board approval? Correct.
Yeah, I think mine's like 25,000.
Yeah, you're a rock star. So
But
we got our
but
great beard expert with the $1 million budget. No, but no, that seems makes sense. You're traveling and you don't want to get put in a bind or something.
yeah, but like I'll order $50,000 worth of paint or canvas, and as long as those expenses are within the items that we routinely purchase, I don't have to get an exception. But it'd be anything else that would be above that that would not be either in the budget. That's one of the other big things is has it been budgeted?
Yeah, prior approval.
Yeah.
All right.
Perfect. I appreciate everybody's input. That's awesome. Okay, so just the last slide. And so we went over today the distinction between nonprofit and tax exempt designation and the IRS requirements for 501c3 status. We did go over board member fiduciary duties to ensure that the organization operates within its mission. We went over 4 sample essential policies that the IRS recommends that include conflict of interest, whistleblower, document retention, and executive compensation. And then we also discussed some risk management in order to avoid any illegal activity. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your input.
Thank you, Rikki.
Just a real quick overview. This is a recycled slide from last nonprofit leader circle. This is like, what would a situation report do for your board communications? You know, you're going to keep stakeholders informed. You'll have greater transparency and accountability, streamline your communication, support fundraising. It'll give basically an overview of everything going on and improve your strategic decision making. So for a lot of our Beacon Foresight Group clients, we're instituting the situation report, a sit rep that's built every week through weekly meetings and our weekly agendas, and then the board gets to see it once a month. And then what are those paragraphs of the sit rep? Well, we just have, you know, executive summary, your place to do your big strategic leaders intent, operations and admin, all programming updates, all events and upcoming engagements, fundraising, including grant status, and then community outreach, strategic partnerships, governance and compliance, and then challenges, risks, and any action items. And it gives not only your board a tool that they can really know what's going on, but then you can also give this to significant stakeholders, folks writing $50,000 checks, and you say, hey, you know, you're a critical team member to what we're doing. Let me give you our sit rep and let me show you what everything that's going on. So it's a communication tool for those trusted stakeholders. As always, we do have the school platform. We'd love for you to come join. It's free right now for all nonprofit leaders. And you get in there, you get to see the dialogue. We have discussion boards, and we have our law of circulation board. We have our intros. The law of circulation board is you put your mission, your website, and your donation link, and members of this circle give $10 to your nonprofit. Why? For being a part of this community. So most masterminds have monthly fees, and right now we want to direct the monthly fees to each other. So you put your Horsemanship for Heroes stuff in there, Scott Hooper, and then everyone sees it in there, and then you get $10 donations in there. And then likewise, you see other people's nonprofits in the law of circulation group, and then you give $10 to those groups. Is it equitable? Will you get all the dollars back that you get? Maybe not. but you're also going to see people looking at your website, giving you feedback, saying, why are you still using PayPal for a donation site? You know, why don't you have a better donation link? Hey, why didn't I ask for my address? Maybe they'll give you feedback that otherwise you wouldn't have received. And then that is value that's paid for. We only ask for approximately $10 a month to each nonprofit. So right now it's a pretty low bar, but man, when you get a donation for $10, it really gets people motivated. So we're really trying something different here. We have the WhatsApp group. So I did post right beforehand that we were starting to get people to come in, and we're doing 2 mastermind sessions a month, and we're doing 2 special topics. So next Tuesday, we have the strategic clarity system, where Roy Adams and I, he's a strategist from the military. He's also the executive director of Chairs of Honor. And we're going to give an overview of what our strategic clarity system looks like to provide nonprofits strategic clarity. And then that will drive programming, that will drive fundraising, that drives your grant toolkit and your readiness for grants. So that'll be a great overview. That's a special topic. And then we'll have our normal 4th Thursday of the month for the next nonprofit circle. So we got 2 main events coming up. All right, I know we only have a few minutes, so did anyone have any questions for the group? And we also encourage you to put those discussions into the school community. Just open it up to the floor. We do have a few minutes, so feel free to talk. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't really have a whole lot to add. I really appreciate Rikki's presentation today. It was you guys give me a hard time for having a established nonprofit, but I tell you, I learned something every day. And Rikki, thank you very much.
That was fantastic, Rikki. I appreciate it.
Good. You're welcome.
And the intent is you could use these slides. You could bring Rikki to your own board meeting and say, we're going to do board 101. We have fundraising 101, and you have the recording too. So the recordings are going on the Beacon Foresight Group YouTube channel. There is a link, so you could theoretically have board members get onboarded using what Rikki just said. And it's like, hey, let's give you fair warning what you're about to get into. Go ahead, Toby.
Yeah. Can I add something real quick before Toby goes?
Sure.
Yeah, so just to finish that, there's another part of the discussion that maybe another time we get together, but I could probably talk for a while on board recruitment and board expectations. And so I know people are looking to add to their boards and how they go about doing that. I think that could be beneficial to everyone.
Yes, we would love to have that, because I've had some one-on-one discussions with you, and I think it's definitely valuable for everyone to hear what I know you have to offer. Scott Hooper? Or Toby, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Rikki, thanks for pointing out what I need to work on. No, one question is, so if you don't have executive compensation, do you need an executive compensation policy?
I would say even if you don't have executive compensation, write the policy to state that, right? Like, just, we aren't compensating our executive director right now. It may be an option in the future, and we'll review that policy annually, twice a year, etc., whatever, just so that it's in the record, so that you have something. If you're applying for a grant, it may be something that they are looking for. So that's just my opinion. Vince might have more insight on that than that, though.
Well, normally we've talked about, it's really cool for an executive director to say, I don't take a dollar from the nonprofit, but then there's other things that maybe you could get your internet reimbursed, or a cell phone paid for, monthly cell phone bill, or a small stipend for your car for mileage. You can get mileage reimbursed. So really the key point of a nonprofit is being fully transparent to the public because you're a public charity. So it's like, hey, maybe the executive compensation is we do not give stipends or salary or treat our executive director as a 1099, but we do reimburse expenses for conduct of duties, which includes or may include, uh, cell phone, internet, car stipend, mileage reimbursement at the IRS rate of 70 cents. It's 70 cents a mile right now. It may be even 72 and a half. I don't know. It keeps
It's
going up.
different for nonprofits, actually, so we do need to be careful. The reimbursement rate for mileage for nonprofits is different than
Okay.
the standard for profit, so we do have to be careful with that. But
Yes, this is not financial advice, but take a look at how you can report even reimbursement of expenses as part of your executive compensation declaration. All right, so we're at the top of the hour, so this recording will be posted in the school community. Everyone will have access to it, and we look forward to more dialogue, and we look forward to law circulation to pay it forward, and you'll see the benefit. And I can't wait. 2 weeks from now, I would like to hear about any kind of surprising law circulation stories about either checks coming in that weren't expected or new relationships or anything like that. So let's start to see the law circulation come to action. So we had some great takeaways today, and we're going to close with a closing thought of gratitude that I affirm that all of our nonprofits are thriving, that they're abundantly supported, they're guided by divine wisdom, that every resource, opportunity, connection flows to us effortlessly, empowering us to create lasting impact. We operate in the natural rhythm of giving and receiving, knowing that prosperity is a continuous, limitless flow. And we serve with joy, integrity, and purpose. The universe meets our every need, magnifying our mission and expanding our reach.